It started as one of those perfect summer mornings, the kind that makes you forget about work, deadlines, or the ever-present noise of the neighborhood group chat. The air was warm, sunlight poured over the cul-de-sac, and for once, the sound of kids laughing was louder than the sound of lawnmowers. My two daughters, Ella and Sophie, had decided to set up a lemonade stand at the edge of our driveway. It wasn't fancy, just a folding table, a hand-painted sign, and a jug of their grandmother's old lemonade recipe. They were proud, beaming, and full of that childhood excitement that only comes from doing something on their OW noon. Most of the neighbors had stopped by. Kids from down the street brought their bikes. Parents chatted at the curb, and for a few hours, our quiet little cul-de-sac felt like a real community again. It was simple, wholesome, and harmless. Or at least, that's what I thought, until the HOA president herself appeared. Her name was Carol, though everyone in the neighborhood knew her by a different name, Karen. She was the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood aesthetic, the kind of person who measured grass height with a ruler and sent out violation letters for unapproved trash bin placement. She always carried a clipboard, wore a permanent frown, and somehow managed to make every friendly gesture feel like an inspection. She arrived at the end of our driveway just as a few kids were laughing over their lemonade cups. Her golf cart hummed to a stop, and that clipboard came out like a weapon. Even from where I stood on the porch, I could tell what was coming. She surveyed the stand as if it were some kind of environmental hazard. The sign, the table, even the jug. Everything seemed to offend her sensibilities. Why that evening, I found the notice taped neatly to our mailbox. It wasn't a polite suggestion or even a warning, it was a fine. A full HOA violation for operating an unlicensed commercial business on residential property.
$50.
For a children's lemonade stand. The paper was signed by none other than Carol herself, written in that perfectly slanted handwriting she used for every passive-aggressive memo. At first, I laughed. It seemed too absurd to take seriously. A fine for kids selling lemonade? Surely it was some mistake or maybe a joke taken too far. But when I called the HOA office, they confirmed it, the violation was real. And according to the bylaws, it would stand unless appealed in writing within 7 days. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table looking at that piece of paper, the laughter had faded from the day. My daughters didn't understand why they had been in trouble for doing something good. They'd used their allowance to buy the lemons, made every cup by hand, and even donated half their little earnings to the local animal shelter. And now they were being punished for it. The next morning, I saw Carol patrolling again in her golf cart, the clipboard resting proudly on her lap. The sight made something inside me shift. Not anger at first, but something sharper, colder. It wasn't just about the fine anymore. It was about principle. It was about standing up to the endless nitpicking, the control, the way one person could drain the joy out of something as simple as lemonade on a summer day. Over the next few days, I started talking to other neighbors. Quiet conversations at mailboxes, friendly chats on sidewalks, and one by one, the stories came out. Carol had fined Tom for hanging Christmas lights too early. She'd fined Linda for having non-compliant flower colors in her front garden. She'd fined the Johnsons for leaving a basketball hoop visible from the street. The list went on. Everyone had a story, everyone had a frustration, but no one had ever fought back. Until now. By midweek, I had an idea brewing. Something bigger than just an appeal letter. If Carol wanted to enforce every bylaw in the book, maybe it was time to see how well she followed them herself. The HOA rules were public after all, and I'd read enough of them to know they applied to everyone, even the president. So I started watching. Nothing invasive, nothing illegal, just careful observation. Her house sat 2 doors down from mine. A pristine 2-story with manicured hedges and a welcome mat that felt ironic at best. It didn't take long to spot the cracks. A garbage bin left out past collection day. A decorative flagpole taller than regulation height. An unapproved security light installed near her garage. Small things, sure, but by her own standards, every one of them was a violation. By the end of that week, I had a list of her infractions longer than the one she'd given my kids. I shared it discreetly with a few neighbors, and the reactions were priceless. Disbelief turning into laughter, laughter turning into something stronger. Unity. We decided to form a little committee. Not an official one, of course, but a neighborhood coalition of sorts. Our mission: hold Carol accountable using the same rules she used to control everyone else. It wasn't just revenge. It was poetic justice. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I printed out the paperwork. Formal violation notices, identical to the one she'd given us. Each written with care, citing the exact bylaws, complete with photographic evidence. Every detail was precise, professional, and painfully accurate. By the following morning, Carol's mailbox was full. She'd been fined for each and every infraction. 10 in total. The look on her face when she discovered them was something I'll never forget. The clipboard dropped. The lips pursed. Her golf cart sat idle for the first time in weeks. But this was only the beginning. That night, as I sat back with a glass of lemonade, the same recipe that had started all this, I felt something shift in the neighborhood. A quiet buzz of rebellion. People were smiling again, waving, talking. Carol wasn't defeated yet, but she'd been challenged. And for the first time, it wasn't one family standing alone. It was the entire cul-de-sac. The next day, an emergency HOA meeting was called. The notice appeared on every door, bold and urgent. The topic? Unauthorized actions against HOA authority. And as the neighbors began to whisper, gathering their notes and their frustrations. I knew the real showdown was about to begin. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon, right in the middle of what should have been the most peaceful time of the week. Normally, people spent that time tending their lawns, grilling on their porches, or watching kids ride bikes around the cul-de-sac. But that day, the neighborhood had a different kind of energy, tense, electric, expectant. Word had spread fast. Everyone knew what the meeting was really about, and for once, it wasn't about weeds, paint colors, or trash cans. It was about Carol. By the time I walked into the community clubhouse, nearly every seat was filled. Neighbors who had barely spoken in months sat side by side, whispering in low tones. A few even smiled at me, small nods of solidarity passing between us. On the far side of the room sat Carol, flanked by two other board members. Roger, the perpetually nervous treasurer, and Denise, the secretary who avoided confrontation like it was contagious. Carol's clipboard sat in front of her like a badge of power, her lips pursed in that familiar disapproving line. The meeting began the way they always did, procedural, stiff, and painfully self-important. Carol recited the agenda as if reading from scripture. But when she reached the final point, her voice sharpened. Unauthorized fines issued to board members. That was her battlefield. Her tone dripped with righteous indignation, but underneath it, I sensed something new. The faintest tremor of panic. She started by accusing certain residents of attempting to undermine the authority of the HO. She spoke about community order, respect for governance, and proper channels for grievances. It was the same robotic language she used in every notice and email, but now the words fell flat. People weren't nodding. They were listening and waiting. When she paused to take a breath, Roger nervously shuffled his papers. It was the perfect opening. I stood up. Every eye turned toward me, the air suddenly thick with silence. Normally, HOA meetings were the kind of events people endured. That day, no one dared look away. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. I began by explaining the sequence of events. The lemonade stand, the fine, and the sheer absurdity of penalizing two children for something as harmless as selling lemonade on a summer afternoon. I laid out the evidence, the timestamps, the rules Carol herself had used to justify the fine. Then, I turned to the violations we had found. Hers point one by one, I read them aloud. The unauthorized flagpole, the overheight garden light, the trash can left out past collection, the unapproved modifications to her front steps. Each one cited, documented, and supported by photos she herself had trained us all to take, in the name of community compliance. By the fourth violation, murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. By the seventh, someone laughed, quietly at first, then more openly. By the time I finished the 10th, the room had changed entirely. People weren't afraid anymore. They were amused, empowered, even gleeful. For years, they had been on the receiving end of Carol's relentless enforcement. Now, they were watching her squirm under the same spotlight she turned on everyone else. Carol tried to regain control. She slammed her clipboard shut and declared that the so-called fines were illegitimate. She said only the HOA had the authority to issue violations. But that only made things worse. Someone from the back, old Mr. Henderson, who'd lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone, spoke up. His voice was calm but firm. He reminded everyone that Carol was the HOA, in the sense that she had run it unopposed for years. She'd silenced dissent, ignored complaints, and weaponized rules to serve her own sense of control. That was when something remarkable happened. One by one, neighbors began to speak. Linda, whose garden had once been called unapproved. The Johnsons, fined for their basketball hoop. Tom, who'd been cited for his Christmas lights. Each person had a story, each one adding to the growing wave of frustration that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Carol tried to interrupt, but her words were drowned out by the sound of people finally, collectively saying, enough. It was no longer just about my kids or a lemonade stand. It was about fairness, about community, about taking back the neighborhood from someone who had mistaken authority for ownership. The meeting stretched on for hours. Arguments flared, voices rose, but for the first time, the discussion felt real. People weren't afraid to disagree. They weren't afraid of Carol anymore. By the end of it, someone, I don't even remember who, made a motion to call for a special election. A vote to replace the current board. The motion was seconded immediately, and the vote was unanimous. Carol's face turned pale. The clipboard that had once been her symbol of power now lay motionless in front of her. She tried to protest, citing bylaws and technicalities, but Roger, nervous, sweating yet oddly resolute, leaned over and reminded her that the bylaws allowed for it. For the first time, he didn't take her side. When the meeting finally adjourned, the sun had already set. People lingered in the parking lot, laughing and talking like old friends. There was a sense of relief in the air. Not victory yet, but possibility. The neighborhood had woken up. The spell of fear had been broken. That night, I walked home with my daughters. They didn't fully understand what had happened, but they could tell something had changed. The streetlights glowed softly against the pavement, and the air felt lighter somehow. On the way, we passed Carol's house. The blinds were drawn tight, the porch light off. For the first time, her golf cart sat parked. Untouched. It would have been easy to feel triumphant, but I didn't. Not yet, because something told me Carol wouldn't go quietly. And I was right. The next morning, I found another notice taped to my mailbox. Only this time it wasn't from the HOA. It was from Carol herself. Personal letter. Handwritten. Short but sharp. If I thought the fines had humiliated her, I was wrong. I had provoked something deeper, her pride, and she was about to strike back. The letter was short but heavy with venom. A few neat sentences scrawled in that perfect, pointed handwriting. Carol accused me of defamation, harassment, and incitement against HOA leadership. She threatened legal action if I didn't cease and desist from my so-called campaign. At the bottom, she'd signed it in her usual flourish, followed by a reminder that she still held authority pending review. It was classic Carol, the language of control cloaked in bureaucracy. But this time, her words didn't have the same weight. I didn't feel intimidated, only more certain that the neighborhood had done the right thing. Still, I knew one thing for sure. She wouldn't stop until she found a way to reassert her dominance. That weekend, Carol doubled down. She sent emails to every homeowner, accusing the rebellious residents of undermining the neighborhood's reputation. She claimed property values were at risk because of disruptive individuals. It was desperate, transparent, and almost comical. But she wasn't completely wrong. Something had changed in the neighborhood, only not in the way she feared. People were talking more than ever. Yards once empty were now filled with small gatherings. The group chat that had once been dominated by her passive-aggressive announcements was now filled with laughter, memes, and plans for the upcoming special election. It was as if the entire community had woken from a long, collective sleep. Still, I wanted to end things on a note that no one, not even Carol, could twist into hostility. I wanted something symbolic, something that reminded everyone why this had all started. And then it hit me, the lemonade stand. The following Saturday, exactly 2 weeks after that first fine, we set it up again. This time, it wasn't just Ella and Sophie behind the table. It was nearly every kid in the cul-de-sac. Parents brought folding tables, chairs, and pitchers. Someone even brought a cotton candy machine. A neighbor with a small business donated branded cups that read, "Freedom tastes like lemonade." The whole street transformed into a spontaneous summer festival. Laughter echoed down the block, music played softly from portable speakers, and every family contributed something. Cookies, popcorn, water balloons for the kids. It wasn't just a lemonade stand anymore. It was a statement. I didn't advertise it. I didn't send out a single message to Carol or the HOA. But of course she noticed. How could she not? Her house faced the cul-de-sac directly, and from her front window, she could see everything. The tables, the signs, the smiling faces. For the first hour, her blinds stayed tightly shut. Then, as if on cue, the golf cart appeared. The laughter quieted slightly as she rolled closer, clipboard in hand. A few parents watched her warily, ready for a confrontation. But I told them to relax. Let her come. Let her see. She stopped at the edge of the crowd, her eyes scanning the setup like a hawk searching for rule violations. Then she spotted the sign, Neighborhood Lemonade Day, sponsored by the people. I could practically see the steam rising from her ears. Without saying a word, she started scribbling notes on her clipboard. But as she looked up, she realized no one was paying attention to her anymore. The kids were too busy serving lemonade, the parents too busy laughing. Even Roger, her once loyal treasurer, was there, sipping from a cup and chatting with neighbors. For a moment, she just sat there, pen frozen. Then, as if realizing the futility of it all, she lowered the clipboard. Her eyes met mine for a brief second. A mix of anger, confusion, and something else. Maybe it was defeat. Maybe it was disbelief that the neighborhood she thought she controlled had moved on without her. She turned her cart around slowly, drove back to her driveway, and disappeared inside. That was the last time anyone saw Carol in her role as HOA president. A few days later, she resigned officially and without fanfare. Her letter of resignation was terse, blaming unreasonable hostility and lack of respect for leadership. No one bothered to reply. The election went forward as planned, and Roger, the once timid treasurer, was voted in as interim president. The first motion he passed, removing all unnecessary fines and restoring community decision-making through open votes. The next few weeks were the calmest the neighborhood had ever seen. No warning letters. No random citations. People actually enjoyed their homes again. Lawns grew a little uneven, kids played freely, and no one cared if a basketball hoop stayed up overnight. It wasn't perfect, but it was human. As for the lemonade stand, it became an annual tradition. Every summer, families gathered at the same spot, and every child who wanted to sell something was welcomed. We even made a sign that hung proudly at the entrance to the cul-de-sac, in memory of the Great Lemonade War. But the most surprising thing happened a few months later. I came home one afternoon to find a small envelope on my porch. No return address, but I knew the handwriting immediately. Carol's. Inside was a single $50 bill, the same amount she'd fined us for that first lemonade stand. And beneath it, a note. Maybe the lemonade wasn't the problem. Maybe I was. No apology. No explanation. But that one line said everything. I placed the bill in a frame and hung it in the kitchen, right above where Ella and Sophie had first mixed their lemonade. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of innocence can spark the biggest changes, and that even the most stubborn Karen can, in her own way, admit defeat. The neighborhood never went back to the way it was, and that was the best part. The fear was gone, replaced by laughter, friendship, and freedom. Every time the kids opened their lemonade stand, I'd smile and think back to that summer when a clipboard, a few lemons, and a little defiance turned a cul-de-sac into a community again.